Jay McMahon, Republican candidate for Massachusetts Attorney General, is our guest. Let's go on the record. A Cape Cod attorney and conservative to the core, can he post a victory in a state that hasn't had a Republican AG since 1969? The candidate's here to make his case.
From WCVB Channel 5, the inside word from Washington to Beacon Hill. Today's newsmakers are going on the record.
And welcome to OTR, everybody. I'm Ben Cimino, along with News Center 5's political reporter Sharmin Sacchetti. Ed and Janet are off this weekend. And joining us this morning is Jay McMahon. He's the Republican candidate for Massachusetts Attorney General, a lifelong resident of Cape Cod. He's a practicing attorney. He's also served in the Massachusetts Army National Guard. A graduate of UMass, he holds a law degree from Suffolk University. Jay McMahon, thanks for being here this morning.
Well, good morning. It's good to be here with you.
Thanks for being here. So let's get right to it. In your backyard right now, there are 50 migrants who were flown here from Texas by Florida Governor Ron DeSantis. A Texas sheriff says they were lured here. He's opened up a criminal probe. The migrants are also suing Ron DeSantis. If you are Attorney General here in Massachusetts, what steps would you take? What would you do?
Well, first thing you got to do, the Attorney General is the chief law enforcement officer in Massachusetts, so we have to do things in accordance with law. And so these migrants, and I've been told they're illegal aliens, and if they are, then they have to be processed properly. And the processing process and the jurisdiction for that is the federal government, Border Patrol, ICE, Customs, those sort of people. Those are the ones that should be resolving this problem.
We understand that they are from Venezuela, and their lawyers say they are seeking asylum here, not necessarily illegal. That is still legal in this country to seek asylum.
It's not illegal to seek asylum, but it is illegal to cross the border without being properly processed. And that's the problem that we're having here. The fact that they are here and seeking asylum requires certain processes that they have to go through, and they have to prove their case in order to do it.
Go ahead.
Should the Florida governor, though, have flown them here unannounced?
The Florida governor is going to do what he wants to do.
No, but it is an issue. Should he have done it?
Whatever he did, it affected us adversely, and I'm not happy with that.
He should have notified at least local officials that they were coming, no?
He probably should have, but of course, when people cross the border illegally and enter this country, they don't notify anybody. They just drift to wherever they want to go. And particularly in Massachusetts, we have a problem because we're giving licenses to illegal aliens right now, and that's making Massachusetts a magnet, no matter how they're coming here.
But should people ever be used in political games? That's what this was, let's be honest.
I'll tell you what, I'm not happy about that. My heart actually goes out to these migrants, although I've been told that they were asked whether they wanted to volunteer to come here.
Well,
right.
We could go on for a while.
Absolutely.
You were unopposed in the Republican primary, so a lot of voters don't necessarily know all your platforms. Would you consider yourself a Trump Republican?
I am a Republican, and when I talk to the people, the issues that they are concerned with is crime in the streets, fentanyl that's flowing all through our neighborhoods, the opioid epidemic, and just plain public safety and gang-related violence in their neighborhoods.
But
those are the things that they're concerned with, and those are the things I've been talking about.
The former president continues to insist, despite evidence all to the contrary, that the 2020 election was rigged. Was it? Was Joe Biden duly elected?
Joe Biden, no question, was sworn in as the president.
Was he duly elected?
He was elected, and the evidence, because I can't go by gut feeling. I have to go by the evidence.
He lost 60 lawsuits, President Trump did. 60 lawsuits.
Well, what he actually lost was the motions to have an injunction against the results. The problem with all that...
So you won't say that Joe Biden was duly elected President of the United States?
I'd say that the evidence, as far as the Secretary of States and the individual states have certified their decisions.
It's really a yes or no question. Was he or wasn't he?
According to the certifications by the Secretary of States of the various states, he was.
And that's the best information we have, isn't it?
It is at the moment.
And the courts have not looked at any of these measures that the former president has brought forth, but yet you still seem to raise some doubts about it.
Well, the only doubts that I hear have nothing to do with the Attorney General of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. In other words, you're asking me
Yeah,
to
but
look
doesn't
at
your view,
the
but
2020.
your view on the sanctity of our elections in this country certainly raises questions about you want to be the chief law enforcement officer in the Commonwealth,
Absolutely.
which certainly has some jurisdiction over. You don't run elections, but you certainly would have some say about what happens after elections.
Oh, absolutely.
But I guess my point is, you will not say that Joe Biden was duly elected president of the United States.
No, I'm telling you that he was, because based on what the certifications were from each Secretary of State of each state in the country.
All right, let's move on. This week, the New York Attorney General sued former President Donald Trump, accusing him and his children of widespread fraud. I wonder what your reaction to that is, and some of the ongoing investigation into the January 6th insurrection.
All right, so these are things that are happening nationally. These are things that are happening to Trump. But the people I'm talking to are not talking about Trump. They're talking about the economy. They're talking about crimes in the streets. They're talking about how can the Attorney General affect their daily lives. And so those are the issues that I've been talking with them. And I've been making my case based on that. I've been making my case on law enforcement, on whether we should defund the police
but
or whether we should encourage the police.
You also make it very clear that you do support the former president. So I'm asking, what is your reaction to this latest suit?
It's a civil suit. And on every law enforcement action or on every suit, the beginning is the complaint. After that, it's the ferreting out of different things, different perspectives, till they get to discovery and the facts. Everything rests on the facts, and I analyze everything based on facts.
Should the January 6th hearings continue?
Should they continue?
Yes.
They should continue until they're completed.
All right, another big issue this campaign season is abortion. The Massachusetts legislature has spoken loud and clear on that. Governor Charlie Baker, a Republican, signed the Roe Act after it was passed by the legislature, which codifies the protections of Roe v. Wade into state law.
That's right.
Should the state's abortion laws be changed? And if so, how?
If they're going to be changed, they get changed by the legislature. I'm not running for a legislative office. I'm running for a law enforcement position. And in my case, I have to uphold the law as the legislature passes them.
And they have passed it.
There you go.
Was the Supreme Court wrong to strike down Roe v. Wade?
No, they were on
50
constitutional grounds. They were absolutely correct the way they analyzed the case. But that hasn't changed anything here in Massachusetts. Not one issue with respect to abortion has been changed in Massachusetts. What that Supreme Court decision said was that with respect to the federal Constitution, it is not a federally protected right. It belongs to each state. That issue is to be settled by each state. But some
members of your party in Congress want to put in a ban in place nationwide, passed by Congress, that would overturn what's in place here in Massachusetts. Do you support that, a 15-week ban?
Well, first of all, no one from my party in Congress has asked my opinion on that. And when people do ask my opinion, well, it's not a question of whether I support it, because I have nothing to do with it. I can't pass that law. The only thing I can do is enforce the law when it's passed. And right now, there is no ban, there is no infringement on a woman's right to choice.